is June 14th, 2025, and tensions continue to remain high in the Middle East, with Israel's defense minister declaring that Tehran will burn if Iran's retaliation continues. This comes just one day after Iran began that retaliation that included a barrage of drones and ballistic missiles that notably landed in Tel Aviv, hitting the IDF's military headquarters, or Israel's equivalent of the Pentagon. This, of course, comes after the unprecedented attack launched by Israel and the US, targeting nuclear facilities and ballistic missile factories in Iran, but also that involved a number of assassinations targeting the Iranian military's command. So what does this mean for where this war is headed? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest who joined us from Tehran earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you very much for having me on your show, Rachel.
Always good to talk to you and to get your insight, especially at a time like right now. And I want to get into the latest here because, as we saw after Israel carried out an unprecedented attack against Iran, which was fully supported by the US, Iran did not wait to retaliate this time. It kicked off Operation True Promise 3, which saw ballistic missiles and drones striking Tel Aviv. And Iran has made it very clear that this retaliation will last as long as it needs to. You also have Israel previously saying that it has 14 days of attacks planned out. So, to start here, how do you view the current situation in what is now a full-blown war?
It's not just Trump and the elites in Washington, it's the European elites too, who are supporting aggression and attacks on nuclear installations, which could bring about radioactive leaks. That's how powerful the Zionist lobby is in the West. They carry out a Holocaust in Gaza. They're fully backed. They carry out genocidal strikes. Lebanon. They support ISIS and Al Qaeda. Syria, and the West supports them completely. And therefore, it's not so surprise that when they attack Iran unprovoked, murder women and children, that the West will still support them. We shouldn't be surprised. We've seen scenes in Tehran where families were burned alive. We've seen children, like in the scenes in Gaza and Beirut, children thrown thrown out of their bedroom windows, and the West fully supports this. Imagine that if some unprovoked attack was carried out against the American people, against your key installations, how would ordinary Americans feel? Iranians are outraged. And it's interesting that or before the attack, in the Western media and Western think tanks and Israeli regime officials and so-called think tankers, they would say that the Iranian regime is unpopular. If we just give it a push, it'll collapse. It's corrupt. It's falling apart. Something that they've been saying for decades. And well, the exact opposite happened. People were on the streets yesterday demanding a retaliation. They were demanding that the armed forces retaliate, that the government retaliate. They believe their own propaganda. These think tanks, they have their own, like these Iranians who will say what needs to be said to get a good salary, and then they get good budgets, and then they invite senators and congressmen, and they give them good money, honorariums, and they create this circle, and this narrative is something that they believe their own narrative, which is detached from reality, and it causes dangerous miscalculation. But that's what we have. So right now, we have Iranians who are angry. They want retaliation, and the government has promised retaliation. It began last night, and it will continue in the coming hours. But it is interesting that uh, the the so-called defense minister or the genocide minister in Israel says we're going to burn Tehran. What sort of creatures are we dealing with? They wanted to burn Gaza, then burn Beirut. That's a supremacist worldview. That's the result of ethno-supremacism. They consider the rest of humanity as subhuman, and so life is of no value. And their supporters in the West, what they are supporting is ethno-supremacism and the subordination of other races and other peoples to this ethno-supremacist regime. And the West pretends that it supports human rights and that it supports equality, but it's the exact opposite. That's not just inaccurate. It's the exact opposite of reality. Iran's sin is that it is the only country alongside Yemen, since the new Yemeni government was formed a decade ago, it's the only government that supports the Palestinian people, that's willing to do something about it, that will take action to support the Palestinian people instead of just instead of just making statements like other governments. Uh, and that is why Iran is sanctioned. The nuclear program is an issue not because of the nuclear program itself, but because it is an excuse to harm Iran, to sanction Iran because of Iran's support for Palestine. Human rights, terrorism, if they could, global warming, all of these are used or would be used if they could be used against Iran, simply because of the Palestinian cause and because Iran is a sovereign and independent. It is a fiercely sovereign and independent country after the revolution. So what they've done, as I said, is that they've united Iranians, and I haven't seen such unity for since the war, since Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. And this, I think, is a miscalculation. So maybe they think that they achieved something through a surprise attack, but I think ultimately uh, they've hurt themselves more because they've presented Iran as the victim to the world. They've exposed themselves further, and ordinary Iranians are outraged that the United States and Israeli regime would murder people like this.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that that's a really good point to bring up at a time when, in recent years, anytime there is any kind of protest in Iran, the West blows it up and they act as if we need regime change now. But as you're noting there, and we saw a version of this in Russia, when a country is targeted and when you have someone like Israel claiming that it's some sort of preemptive strike that they had to act, that is going to make Iranians rally together more than ever and demand retaliation, exactly as you were saying there. Now, when it comes to the strikes that were carried out, right, and Iran's retaliation that we've seen so far, Israelis have been very quick to complain about the damage that they've seen in Tel Aviv or the fact that they were being rushed to bomb shelters after 20 months of Israel bombing, not only bombing Gaza, bombing the Palestinians, but dropping the equivalent of multiple nuclear bombs, bombing literal tents in refugee camps. These people don't have, any sort of bomb shelters to go to. So, what do you make of the double standard that we're seeing right now when Israel has to play this constant victim with this conflict that they themselves started?
I think in the past, they could get away with it because Western media, of course, was more powerful back then, and the West was more powerful. And especially in the West, the West is the most, and especially the Americans, they're the most propagandized people in the world. And now, though, uh, we see the world changing, people in the West itself waking up to the reality of what these elites in the West are really all about. And you see these images from Gaza, from Lebanon, day and night on social media, even though social media, American social media, tries to censor them and downplay them or shadow ban accounts that are exposing the reality. But despite all that, it's become so ugly and disgusting and open. The racism and the way in which they view other people as subhuman, uh, that people have woken up. That people who were uh, behind this great wall of propaganda, they are now seeing through that wall, and Israel has been exposed. So people across the world understand what the regime is all about, and they understand what Western regimes that support it are all about. So in the past, it would be difficult to convince people about that the fact that Israel is an ethno-supremacist regime, that it's carrying out ethnic cleansing, that it is torturing and jailing many thousands of Palestinians illegally from the occupied West Bank, and they don't even charge them, that they have rape in their prisons. In the past, it would have been difficult to convince people, but it is so ugly now, and it is so out in the open, and it is happening 24 hours a day. So people see through all this propaganda. And so it's not very difficult to convince people, whether in Iran or outside of Iran, what's really happening. In fact, lots of people now, when I speak with them, they are much more politically aware than I am, especially a lot of young people. Their eyes have been opened to many realities. And I think this is probably the gravest mistake that Western elites have made. They've pushed too hard and they've exposed themselves to the world. So no one in Iran has any sympathy for the Israeli regime. Everyone in Iran sees Iran as the victim. And therefore, that makes the Iranian people far more determined to, to remain steadfast in the face of this aggression. And Iran has sympathy from across the world. People no longer believe these Western narratives. The only people who believe in Western narratives are those who are ideologically bound to ethno-supremacism, like like Zionists or Christian Zionists, who their cult believes that Christ somehow supports genocide and ethnic cleansing, or they claim that Christ is like that. Except for these sort of people, people have almost all woken up, and those who haven't woken up are in the process of waking up.
And I think that that's a good thing to keep in mind, right, as you're looking at especially the news coverage in the West and the way in which they try to frame everything. I'm also curious too when it comes to how things could escalate moving forward. I know that when I've had you on my show previously, you had warned in the past that if Iran is attacked, that it could move to block the traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, and that, of course, Ansar Allah could move to block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, two critical choke points that could bring energy trade to a halt and send prices soaring. So, how do you view kind of where things stand right now? And do you think that the US and the West as a whole, that they realize what is at stake here?
I think many people recognize what's at stake, but the problem is that many people in the West, in the political elite, politicians, they're bound to the neocons and the Zionists, and their jobs depend on their support for these entities, for these groups, and for the Israeli regime, or those who support war in Ukraine, but in this case, Zionists in particular. So they're willing to sacrifice their own country, the interests of their own people, for the sake of the Israeli regime, because that's where the money comes from. It's not all that different from the support for the expansion of NATO and the war in and the proxy war in Ukraine, where Russia, which had sought good relations with the West, kept being presented as an enemy. And so they kept expanding Ukraine, pushing Russia away, and then they carried out the coup in Ukraine, and then they armed it to the teeth. That was all done in order, in contrast to the interests of the European people and the American people. American politicians are sacrificing the interests of their people by paying for this dirty war, and Europeans even more so. They're sacrificing the interests of their economies and their people because they're bound to the neocons and Zionists in the United States. So it's not very surprising to see how these people support the Israeli regime. So that's the danger, that they could push the United States into direct confrontation with Iran. If that happens, there's no doubt that Iran will destroy U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf region, and U.S. interests across the region will be destroyed. And those Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf, these Arab family dictatorships that have American bases, they will be swept away very swiftly. And that would cause the oil and gas, uh, the price of oil and gas to go through the roof. And it will bring down the global economy. So it's really up to Trump to decide whether he wants to destroy the US economy and the global economy, or he wants to be more sane and refrain from direct conflict. But still, the United States the Trump is implicated. He is complicit in these attacks on Iran. And it's very interesting. The day before he pretends to be against it, then the day after he comes out fully supporting it. And what that does is that it tells the Iranians that you can never trust this person even at the negotiating table. You can't do a deal with such a person. He's a liar. He says one thing, but his intentions are something else. So not only is he always flip-flopping and changing his position, he's utterly deceitful. So this is not in the interest of the United States because other people see the deceit coming out of the White House.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think especially at a time when we've kind of been watching Trump exactly as you were saying there, he goes from claiming that the US is committed to a diplomatic solution to then openly praising Israel's attacks and admitting that they used weapons that came straight from the US. And I also thought it was interesting because you had the Wall Street Journal reporting that, quote, U.S. negotiations with Iran aimed at curbing Tehran's nuclear program were widely seen as an important way to preserve regional peace. They ended up being the perfect cover for a surprise Israeli attack. How do you view, I know certainly the media's version of it, obviously the Trump administration itself was saying they had no evidence that Iran was trying to create or intended to create a nuclear weapon, but yet the media kind of carries the water for Israel, framing it as if Iran is some sort of a threat to the region while Israel is openly carrying out a genocide that is being live streamed and has been for over a year and a half now.
Well, the mainstream media or the legacy media is controlled by those very powerful forces in the United States, those very elites that run or control Washington and London and Paris and so on. So they are going to say what needs to be said. They are utterly dishonest. But the problem is that they've become so dishonest about so many different issues at home and abroad that people don't trust them anymore. People see, for example, the genocide in Gaza and see how the media is trying to justify the genocide or the Holocaust, and they've just lost their credibility. But for anyone who looks at the facts, they'll know that these very same Iran has that the Israeli regime is trying to strike. These are under the supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In other words, scientists affiliated to the IAEA, they are constantly traveling to Iran and visiting these buildings and these underground facilities. So if Iran was building a nuclear weapon, why wouldn't the agency say so? There is no such evidence that Iran is violating international law. And the Israeli regime has been saying Netanyahu in particular has been saying Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon for almost 40 years now. I thought it was like 30 years, but Larry Johnson just recently told me, no, it's more than that. It's almost 40 years. So for 40 years, we've been on the verge of building a nuclear weapon. This is just a tool used in order to to antagonize Iran and to harm Iran because Iran supports the Palestinian people. And and Trump destroys U.S. credibility by being so dishonest, by pretending to negotiate in good faith, and then but secretly plotting to carry out an assault on Iran where women and children are killed and where people are terrorized. Um, that's basically, that's how the United States functions nowadays. It's become so openly crude, the behavior of Washington, that the mask of liberalism and human rights and human equality, all that is gone. On the one, especially it's most interesting, I think, among American liberals, because on the one hand, just a couple of years ago, or a year ago, they were talking about woke culture and about all the different genders but at the same time they support ethno-supremacism and genocide in Gaza. The hypocrisy is now clear for everyone to see, whether it's the genocidal Republicans or Trump, or whether it's the genocidal Democrats and Biden and whoever.
Yeah, it really is, and it's interesting that parallel that you're noting there. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is just kind of where tensions could go from here and where those concerns stand. Because when you have Israel's defense minister coming out and saying Tehran will burn, and we all know that Israel has nuclear weapons. I mean, I'm incredibly concerned about the genocidal maniacs from Netanyahu and beyond that want to target Iran, that have been wanting war for years now, and also equally concerned about those in Washington, Trump and people within his administration that also want to see a war. So, where are your concerns about how Israel could try to escalate, especially as Iran does retaliate and does not let up on its end?
Yes, it's a fact that everyone should be concerned that racist, genocidal maniacs are on the loose, whether in Washington or in Tel Aviv. But Iran is not going to be intimidated by the regime. Iran is not going to give up its sovereignty because the Trump, the regime in Washington demands it. So Iran is going to hit the regime hard. It's going to punish the regime, and this war will continue until the Israeli regime is taught a lesson and until it is forced to accept stopping this, and there are assurances given that this will not be repeated. And in the process, the Iranians will demand that the Holocaust in Gaza come to an end and the assassinations in Lebanon that are in violation of the ceasefire come to an end. The Iranians are not going to relent. They are going to pursue this war until the Netanyahu regime is forced to stop. There is no other way that this war will come to an end, and Iran has the ability to hit the Israelis hard. We saw the beginning of that last night, and it will continue, and it will go on and on. There's no doubt that Iran is, with regards to conventional weapons, Iran is far more powerful than the Israeli regime. They are unable to touch Iran's key assets, all of Iran's key assets, its drone bases, its missile bases, they're all deep underground. The Israelis cannot touch them with these missiles fired from afar. But the Iranians, the warheads that they have on their missiles are much more powerful. So the days ahead will be tough. They'll be painful. The Zionist regime, its defense minister, as you pointed out, wants to burn Tehran. It shows how evil these people are. But Iran will continue to fight, and Iran will have the upper hand, and Iran will force the regime to back down. And the world is watching. Rachel, the world is watching. People don't accept this anymore. China has condemned the Israeli regime. Russia has condemned the Israeli regime. The people across the world are condemning the Israeli regime. It's only backers are Christian Zionists who, again, a cult that claims Christ supports genocide. Uh, I, I don't know that Christ. The Christ that I know would be the opposite. And Zionists, Jewish Zionists, and those who are, and fortunately, we have so many young Jews in particular who are fighting against this evil cult. And you have those who are bound to these people due to their financial needs. They're paid to be on their side. Otherwise, no sane person on this planet that has a bit of humanity would accept the Holocaust in Gaza or the genocidal bombings in Lebanon or the support for ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria or strikes against the Iranian targets and the Iranian nuclear program, unprovoked strikes. No one would accept that.
Yeah, and I know when you look at the fact that Iran is this very important pillar of the multipolar world, exactly as you're noting there, it's no surprise that the US and that Israel have continued to target it in a number of ways and are even escalating tensions now, no matter what it means for them and no matter the impact that it has. There is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Seyed Mohammad Marandi of the University of Tehran, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also find Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.